What I'm going to do today is the following. For the first hour plus that's left, I want to give you some ways to think about millennials, which will go a little bit counter a lot of things, counter church maybe a little bit, counter what you traditionally think about millennials a little bit, things like that. But I want to give you a glimpse of millennials. And I'm going to argue that the church historically has always been intrigued to give people the good news. Millennials do not care about good news. They care about the good life. And churches are poor at best in helping people find the good life. So that's sort of like the first one. The second session, after tea, I am going to give you an introduction to the book of Joel. And hopefully you will discover why the book of Joel, which I think is the most important biblical book of our time. Bar none, the book of Joel. And then after lunch, if we can stay awake, after lunch what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge you to change your mindset, not ministry to millennials, but what would ministry with millennials look like? That's my challenge for after lunch, okay? So that's coming our way. If there are a few things that I would like you to take away, I'm just going to flip through them quick. So because I know people may not be till the very end with us. The first one is that without reaching the millennial generation, and I think that's true in my context, I would bet it's true for your context too. Without reaching that generation, Christianity is in big peril because that means you will also lose their children. And then you begin to lose multiple generations. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I've already talked about the good life. I've already talked about ministering with millennials. That's really important. I've already said that the book of Joel is the book, which is so ironic because it is arguably the most neglected book in biblical scholarship, and it is the most neglected book when it comes to preaching. Actually, in the lectionary text that we use in the States, there aren't any passages of Joel even included, except in Pentecost, where a little portion gets back to us, and I'll show you later where that happens. And then the big thing which gives me hope is that millennials are redefining church as we know it. Can we go along for the ride, or are we too afraid? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to us? But I want to introduce you to a couple of just phenomenal people. Kyle is a very conservative Christian. He's probably more conservative than most of us in this room. He serves the inner city of Los Angeles. At the age of 24, just graduated. He doesn't have a ministry degree. He studied actually psychology in college. He just graduated, and he said nobody is doing anything in the inner city of Los Angeles, where he's white and it's predominantly a black community. Kyle moves in. As he becomes a parent to a city block, one of the kids lose his mom. Kyle, at the age of 26, says, I'll adopt you. Be my child. That's Kyle at 26. There's no church behind Kyle. Nothing. Lindsay is actually somebody in Nashville. She's this big. She's UMC, United Methodist. She's actually extremely progressive. I don't think there's a lot in common between Kyle and Lindsay when it comes to theological debates and things like that, trust me. Lindsay does work with homeless people. She's the only one in our city that goes to homeless people, meet them where they are, and never ever will ask, can I get you a job? Can I get you into a homeless shelter? She will never ask those questions. All she will ask is, what do you need? And if it's healthcare, she brings the doctor to come under the bridge where they live. And that's where the doctor will meet. My church will say, can we ferry you from where you live to the clinic? Can you go to the clinic? Lindsay's the only person who meets people where they are. She's the only person in town when come winter, it's not that cold in Nashville, but it's chilly at night and sometimes below freezing. She will have a stack of blankets. And all she does is she rides, and you're on the street, here's a blanket. You're on the street, you're a blanket. She's UMC. There's not a single UMC church, and we have a few in Nashville, their headquarters are there. We have a few UMC churches, Methodist. There's not a single church behind Lindsay. Jules was a student of mine. He's Haitian. He's Baptist. And his ministry is the following. He'll come to you and he'll say, I would like you to bring me your favorite recipe. Your absolute favorite recipe. And then on a Friday night, we're going to come together at my house. And if you bring the main dish, I will share a recipe of an appetizer. And we're going to bring in somebody else who's going to bring in a recipe of dessert. And they come together Friday night. There's lots of people in his house. Saturday night, there's lots of people in his house. Sunday night, there's lots of people in his house. And what do? They come together, they put the recipes on the table, they cook a wonderful feast together. They share, why is this recipe important to me? How does it tie to my grandma? How does it tie to my mom? Where do I find this recipe? They all eat together, and that's his ministry. He gets no support from anybody. Zero support. RJ is the person who probably changed me the most in writing this project, because RJ is transgendered and their pronouns is they, them, theirs, where mine is him, his. I'm singular male. RJ go by plural. So I had to change my whole book because I cannot write about him and his anymore, because RJ goes by them, because that's what transgendered people typically do. RJ's only ministry is to keep transgendered youth from committing suicide. That's their only ministry. Transgendered youth commit suicide at 4 times the rate compared to the normal population. If you go to Native American and African American transgendered youth, 60% of that youth would have attempted suicide at least once. You and I know from our pastoral care teaching that if somebody tried to commit suicide once and failed and no intervention happens, there's a very good likelihood they'll try again and succeed. RJ is Puerto Rican, grew up conservative Catholic. But when they came out as transgendered, family said, we don't know what to do with you, you're out. Church, who doesn't even know how to engage persons who are gay and lesbian, haven't even thought yet of transgendered persons. No church behind RJ. But that's their ministry. 4 absolutely diverse persons. They span the geography of the US, from Puerto Rico to Los Angeles. They have different denominations, but they have one thing in common. They want to bring change to this world. And the change that they choose are almost always in the sort of social justice realm of some kind. The only common denominator they have is that there's not a single church community behind these folk. Nobody comes to Jules and says, we're going to give you $100 a week so that you can buy the food for all these recipes you're making. Nobody does that. Nobody goes to Lindsay and says, why don't we give you, our church can give you 100 blankets every winter, and that's our covenant to you. You can bargain on 100 blankets. No church opens the doors for RJ and says, we don't quite understand transgender people, but we've got lots of space that is empty 90% of the time. Choose some time you want to use our space, and it's yours for free. Nobody does that. Nobody comes to Kyle and says, at 26, you're an adopted parent, you parent a city block, how can we help? Nobody does that. These millennials, but they are stereotypical of a lot of millennials in the US. And I would say probably a lot of millennials here too, who would like to bring change to the status quo. If you look, however, at what's being printed about millennials with their avocado and egg toast, if you look at millennials, what's being printed, you will see killing is a very prominent word. Murdered, killed. Because millennials are doing things so differently that the same old does not apply. Yesterday I shared with somebody how millennials are changing the auto industry in the US. Millennials do not own cars in the US by and large. Why would you own a car if we can have a pool of 12 cars that's always there, and I buy into a membership, and on my app I can say I want to use the car Tuesday from 9 to 4. And I walk to the car, and with my cell phone I unlock the car, and I drive off, and when I'm done I just park it there, and now there's 200 people using 12 cars. We call them zip cars. And I asked the individual, is there a zip car company here in Stellenbosch? Great. And I'm convinced it's millennials who use it the most. But the stereotypical view of millennials are pretty challenging to face. This is the challenge that the US mainline church is facing. And just from our brief little survey, it's the challenge that you are facing. That the majority of millennials have zero connection with the church. So in the States, it comes to 70% basically. That means there's a population of 81 million millennials. 56 million of them never go to church, have no relationship with formalized religion, organized religion. And so you can imagine these folk who are now basically 37, 38, down to about 18, 19, many of them are becoming parents. And so their kids are just being added to the percentage of folk who will never know the church. One of the reasons why millennials do not want to hang with organized religion is caught by Rob Lee. I will say something more about Rob Lee. He's a Methodist pastor, phenomenal young man, whose ancestor was Robert E. Lee, one of the Confederate generals who fought to keep slavery in place. And you have heard Charlottesville last year, where there was big riots around, the statutes of Confederate soldiers. He spoke out against his ancestor, Robert E. Lee, and his Methodist church promptly fired him, which Methodist church can do. They call up the bishop and they say, we don't want this person anymore, and the next day he's gone. But Lee says churches are dying. Millennials do not want to be part of a dying enterprise. And I have thought hard and long, and you have thought the same way I can imagine. How can we spin what's happening in the church in positive ways? You can't. Mainline Christianity is dying. And to turn that into some positive, good luck trying. Because that's not authenticity, which is one of the values that millennials hold on to. To be authentic would be, yes, we are in deep trouble, and that's why we need you. help us think things through anew, help us discover something in a new way. Of that 70%, 56 million unaffiliated in the US, we can get 3 different categories of people. The first category would be the nuns. Where that comes from would be on any form you have to fill out in the US, you would have to say Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim. That would be one little block you have to fill in. But then a second block you have to fill in would be Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, Anglican, Baptist, Episcopal, things like that. And the millennials tick the very last box, which is none of the above. They just do not associate with that category. Now, Drescher's book is really a wonderful book to read, and if you take the handout, her full description is in the reference list, okay? Drescher says, yes, there are the nuns, but then there are also the sums. And the sums are people who will embrace elements of Christianity. Say, for instance, they believe in prayer, and they do have an active prayer life. But that's all it is. They never come to church, never become part of a community, never do faith life the way that you and I imagine for people. The last category Drescher mentions is the nuns in sums clothing. And those are the folk who sort of live the pretend life of Christian, but they have no commitments to back that up. And all they do is they don't want to shame mom and dad. They don't want to shame grandpa, grandma. So they pretend to live in certain ways, but the commitment is just totally lacking all along. And that is the challenge that we have in the US. We have this amazing a group of people who what we present as a mainline church is just not good enough. And actually, it speaks a language they cannot even hear. So we totally miscommunicate on so many levels. To make things worse is that the stereotypical view of the millennial is almost exclusively negative. If you answered the question which I asked earlier, what frustrates you about working with millennials, I'm convinced some of you could have named something such as that, they just are not respectful. They are not very respectful. Or, like in my colleagues would say, they will choose themselves if they want to come to class or not. If they need a personal day, they'll take their personal day. And they will not come to class. They will say things that they are so damn entitled, this group of people. Then when it comes to sort of a hierarchy and how you relate to power structures, millennials don't care about power structures. It's a flat world of power in the millennial world. When a structure like this is built on a hierarchy all the way through, doesn't work well, doesn't compete well. But if the church holds on to a very, very negative view, I do want to lift up, change the world, which is just a phenomenal trait that they have. If we embrace this very, very negative view of millennials, why on earth would they come to your church? They will sniff you out a mile away that you think poorly about them. That you don't like the fact that they bring suggestions of what to do in the church, which is totally outside of what church has been doing all along. You don't like the fact when they come forward and say, why are no millennials in our church leadership? Why aren't they there? That they can help make the decisions we have to make. Why is that not happening? So you and I face an amazing, amazing challenge that we need to